Welcome to Magic Arcanum. I'm Ryan Gomez. Behind the scenes is Nicole Burdick, and we're so glad you're here because it's story time. Summer is officially here, at least in the northern hemisphere, and temperatures are on the rise. So I thought it would be fun to take a look back at a history of burn spells in Magic. But first, let me invite you to check out Into the AM using the link down below because they're running a markdown sale on select items from July 2nd through the 5th. That makes this weekend the perfect time to grab one of their eye-popping graphic tees or one of their solid colored basics like I'm wearing today. Everything is tailor-fitted and made with high-quality materials, which makes these the most comfortable shirts I've ever owned. They look great and they make you look great. That's all there is to it. And if you visit Into the AM using that link down below, you'll save 10% on your purchase while helping to support the channel, which Nicole and I really appreciate. Okay, so let's talk burn. To count as a burn card, you've got to be an instant or sorcery. You've got to deal damage, and you've got to be able to hit players, not just creatures or planeswalkers. Burn is one of the game's more aggressive strategies, and you can find burn decks in just about every format, but the thing that ties them all together is their dependency on non-permanence to deal enough damage to their opponent to win the game. I want to stress that this is different from what is often called red deck wins, or other sorts of red aggro decks, which typically do use creatures, artifacts, or planeswalkers as their primary sources of damage. The idea of elemental forces like fire or lightning causing harm goes all the way back to the game's very first set, with one of Magic's most iconic cards, Lightning Bolt. This created the yardstick against which all future burn cards would be measured, and it would become a part of strategic discussions for the next 3 decades. Even today, new players are encouraged to bolt the bird, despite possibly never holding an actual lightning bolt themselves so early in their Magic career. And every new creature must pass the bolt test before it will even be considered for a slot in a modern deck. Lightning Bolt is one of those cards that is just a hair too good. They've tried to dial it in by both lowering the damage output and raising the cost, but those cards just make you realize how much you miss having the real thing. As an instant that deals 3 damage to any target for just 1 colored mana, Bolt gets most of its power from its flexibility. It can take a reasonable sized bite out of your opponent's life total, or it can make it hard for them to gain a foothold on the battlefield with their own creatures or planeswalkers. But to me, the most interesting part of Lightning Bolt is that it was actually a member of a cycle, along with Healing Solve, Giant Growth, Dark Ritual, and Ancestral Recall. Each of these instants asked for a single mana of their respective color and gave you 3 of something in return. They ranged from being pretty much useless to being part of the Power 9, just to give you some idea of how unbalanced early Magic really was. And if you think that's wild, wait until you see what other colors also had the ability to deal direct damage. Psionic Blast has the best templating I've ever seen on a Magic card. But it deals 2 damage to you as well. Feels like something Dr. Evil would quip as he's putting laser beams on the heads of his frickin' sharks. There's also Hurricane and Earthquake, which have an almost identical effect but are written 2 entirely different ways. This did set a precedent for green being able to damage flyers though, which is something we still see today. There's one other card from Alpha I also want to talk about, and that's Fireball. It was a pretty straightforward burn spell, in that the more mana you put into it, the more damage it would do, or the more targets it could hit. That's neat and all, but it would be an otherwise pretty unremarkable card, were it not for being part of one of the game's first turn 1 combos. If you were lucky enough to draw a Fireball along with some fast mana sources, which in those days could include a Black Lotus or a Mox, you could create a lethal amount of damage by using a card called Channel. Channel lets you pay life to make mana, so pay 19 life, use your Lotus or Mox to make a bit more mana, and then aim a 20-point fireball at your opponent's face. And that, by the way, is the origin of the name for Channel Fireball, who is not sponsoring this video, but they know where to find me. Anyway, burn was all over the place in the early days of Magic. It could show up on green cards like Stormseeker or Typhoon, but those had a variable output based on things you might not be able to control. Black explored draining effects that dealt damage while also gaining their caster life. And even white got in on the action, though it was always tied to a creature having attacked, which was supposed to symbolize the color punishing aggression. Red remained the best at it, though, mostly because they really put some passion behind it. Take, for example, Incinerate from Ice Age. It costs twice as much as Lightning Bolt, but for the extra mana, you prevent the targeted creature from regenerating for the turn. Regeneration isn't a mechanic that gets used a lot today, but back then, there were some sticky threats out there, and being able to make sure they really died was often worth the extra mana. In the modern era, this type of effect has been replaced by sending the burned creature to exile. This makes it impossible for the creature to be returned to the battlefield or used as fuel for things like delve or escape, and it flavorfully represents the creature in question being turned into absolute ash. When we talk about the color pie and how green is getting too good or white needs more ways to draw cards, I think people often overlook little gems like this. Red can deal direct damage, and it can do it in a way that makes you feel like they really, really wanted your creature to die and stay dead, which is something even black doesn't always bother to express. In a similar vein, we can go back and look at Lava Burst, also from Ice Age. I consider this to be the other half of Red's "yes, this is really happening" philosophy behind blowing things up. Just like Fireball before it, Lava Burst can deal X damage to any target, but instead of being able to spread that damage around, it gains a different line of text. Effects that prevent or redirect damage cannot be used to protect that creature. The Oracle text is a little bit different now, but the idea remains the same. Unless you've got a way to counter this spell, the damage will be happening. This is another important part of Red's color pie, and it's the part of Stomp that a lot of people forget when they try to hide behind 9 lives. Now, the goal of these videos is not to cover every card on the topic, so I apologize if I don't mention your personal favorite. I'm just trying to point out cards that I believe really tell the history of burn spells within Magic. So far, we have seen Pinpoint Burn with Lightning Bolt, Scaling Burn with Fireball, Cremating Burn with Incinerate, and what I'll call Widespread Burn with Earthquake. But these all suffer from the same drawback. Once they are cast, that's it. Decks that rely on burn spells have to win quickly because once they run out of cards, it becomes very hard for them to finish out a game. And that's why I pick Hammer of Bogarden as the next major leap in burn technology. This rare instant from Mirage had an ability that was pretty unique at the time, at least among burn spells. You could play it more than once. This is a very powerful ability, and there's a very good reason you don't see it on many burn spells, even to this day. Being able to repeatedly chip away at an opponent's life total or answer any creature they play almost completely mitigates a burn deck's main drawback, which is supposed to be running out of spells to cast. Magic designers are keenly aware of this, and so now, even in sets that have a major play from the graveyard theme, you will rarely find a burn spell with that set's mechanic. Look at Theros Beyond Death for a recent example. Every color got some escape cards, but red only got 1 instant or sorcery, and it made tokens rather than being a burn spell. And that's a little weird because most sets usually do staple their marquee mechanic onto some variation of a lightning bolt. Igneous Inspiration lets you learn. Royal Eruption can be kicked. Slaying Fire has Adamant. You get the idea. Anyway, there's a few other hot moments in the history of burn. One was the addition of basically Trample. Liquid Fire from Odyssey was an early version of this idea, but it would take Super-Duper Death Ray from Unstable to make it stick. Flame Spill from Ikoria and Pigment Storm from Strixhaven suggest that this is an area of burn that the designers are becoming more comfortable with, now that it functions cleanly within the game's black-bordered rules. And now that we're on the topic of bending rules, what if you're playing a mono-red deck and your crafty mono-white opponent has gone and set up a circle of protection against you, or maybe they put down a core firewalker? Are you just going to give up and cry? Of course not, because you packed some colorless red burn spells just for this situation. Ghostfire from Future Sight was our first introduction to the mysterious spirit dragon known as Ugin, who we would later learn is actually an elder dragon and twin brother to Nicol Bolas. Notably though, this card and Touch of the Void from Battle for Zendikar are special because although they cost red mana to cast, they are colorless burn spells, and as such, they can get around effects that grant protection from red. But what if you have no red mana in your deck at all? What if you're completely tapped out and have no mana of any kind? Well, my friend, the Phyrexians have you covered with Gutshot. Simply pay 2 life, and you can ruin the day of any 1 toughness creature, or of Frank Lepore during round 14 of Pro Tour Oath of the Gatewatch. You're going to want to look that one up. It's worth it. Anyway, for the past 28 years now or so, we've seen burn cards steadily evolve, and the game loves to remind us about this path of progression. Wizard's Lightning from Dominaria becomes a functional lightning bolt if you happen to control a wizard. Repeating Barrage from Ixalan is an updated take on Hammer of Bogarden, this time tied to the raid mechanic, which makes it less useful to a pure burn deck. And if you don't mind mixing your colors, Lightning Helix combines a bolt with a healing salve, straight from the days of Alpha. So burn has certainly come a long way, but what's next? Well, later this year, we're heading back to Innistrad, which has a curious history with burn itself. Bump in the Night is a great example. It doesn't technically fit my definition of burn because it causes life loss rather than deal damage, but it can hit players. It's also a rare example of a burn type spell that can also be cast more than once, thanks to Innistrad's use of the flashback mechanic. Fires of Undeath, Geist Flame, and Devil's Play are other hot cards from our first visit to the plane, but the one that most Brian Kibblers probably remember is Bonfire of the Damned. And yes, that's another one you just have to watch. Sadly, Flashback and Miracles did not return when we came back to the plane for Shadows over Innistrad and Eldritch Moon. Instead, we had to make use of Madness and turn our fiery tempers into makeshift lightning bolts. Burn overall seemed much less commonplace this time around, probably because we had just visited Zendikar and the format was focused on bigger creatures and battlecruiser magic with the Eldrazi. This time, though, we'll be coming in fresh off of a rotation with Strixhaven and its Magecraft mechanics still in the format. That, to me, seems like the perfect environment to get some new graveyard-friendly burn spells. I'll even call a few shots. Remember, we're getting 2 sets of cards on Innistrad. For the one themed around werewolves, I predict a burn spell that does more damage if you had a creature transform on this turn. And for our Vampire Wedding set, I predict a burn spell that gets cheaper to cast the more life you have already gained. They used a similar design space in M21 on a handful of cards, all of which have an Innistrad vampire look to them, by the way. What about you? Got any predictions for what we'll see from Burn in the near future? Let me know down in the comments, and if I like your idea the best, I might even toss you a $25 gift card for Into the AM, so you can pick up some cool shirts for this hot summer we're having. Then, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the great stories you'll only find here on Magic Arcanum. We'll see ya!